But this mentality of expecting perfection and not accepting anything less has some dangerous effects. For example, social media's influence on our physical appearance. As the media constructs the ideal body type, many people's body image gets skewed, which may alter how they view themselves. Todd Jackson describes a process in which people begin to view their body from an outside perspective, and then feel ashamed if the standards imposed on them are not met. Here itself we can see that 80% of women say that images of women on television and in movies, fashion magazines, and advertising make them feel insecure. We can also see that 42% of girls, 1st through 3rd grade, want to be thinner. Putting this last statistic into perspective, that means if we walk into an elementary school today, almost every other girl in that room wants to be skinnier. Another example of today's unrealistic expectations is college's idea of a well-rounded student with a spike. Nowadays, high school students are expected to have above a 4.0 GPA, at least 10 AP classes, excel in sports, music, drama, have extensive standardized test prep, whether that be for the PSAT, the SAT, and/or ACT, have hundreds of hours of community service, and achieve something or another at a national level. And while at the end of the day, all of these things are great and only benefiting ourselves, if not handled properly, can also lead to stress, anxiety, and the not good enough mentality. And finally, we have peer pressure and social acceptance. This is extremely prevalent among high schools, where people are trying to fit in and find which group they belong in. But even this comes with standards and expectations one has to fill. People are expected to maintain a certain style, always be happy and upbeat, and set aside time for social gatherings. Now, I'm sure everyone has experienced, or at least is aware of, the not good enough mentality. But don't worry, I'm not just going to stand up here and tell you all of the ways you might not feel good about yourself. I do have a solution. Thinking about the situation a little bit more obviously, we can come up with what I call the Beyond Stampede approach. This approach simply states that instead of doing what everyone else is doing, do something that you're interested in, or what you want to do. And even though this might sound really simple, it often takes people years to figure out, well, what exactly is it that they're interested in? What is it that they want to do in their lives? Which leads me to my next step, to identify. This is the process of identifying yourself, your goals, your passions, and your desires. And it's also often where many people get stumped. Many people live the majority of their lives not knowing who they are. they hit a wall, so they can learn to pick themselves up, hit a wall again, and pick themselves up again, and ultimately persevere and succeed. But grit isn't the only thing needed to go beyond the state peak. EQ, or emotional intelligence, is also needed. But what exactly is EQ? EQ is not the opposite of IQ, and there's no triumph apart overhead. Instead, it's the unique intersection of both. The reason EQ is so important is because we all want to have success and happiness in our lives. However, the journey of life has inevitably more than a few bumps and bruises with good and bad surprises along the way. Whenever we find ourselves dealing with a difficult situation or loss and failure, it's often easy to expect someone to jump in and save us. When we look around and find that no one has the time to be our savior, we often fall into a vicious cycle of victim's mentality, which is exactly why teaching children to understand their emotions and channel that energy in useful ways can only help them successfully navigate their academic as well as personal lives. Before I end my speech today, I would like to share a quick story. One day, a man saw that there was a cocoon shell and a butterfly inside struggling to emerge. The cocoon shell was too hard for the butterfly to break open. Usually, it takes a couple of hours for the butterfly to eventually break the shell and come out. The man, out of what he thought was compassion, used his nail to crack open the cocoon shell, and the butterfly came out, but it couldn't fly. The time that the butterfly struggles inside the cocoon shell strengthens it so that later it can use its wings and fly. Many parents do the same thing with what they think is love for their children. Thank you. Next up, we have Carroll, who is a sophomore at Carroll High School and an internet advocate. In his TED Talk, he will explain the concept of net neutrality and tell us how